Hello, this is Mike Isbisky, Technical Evangelist with Salt Security, and welcome to another episode of API MythBusters. Today we're going to be talking about identity and access management, web application firewalls, and API gateways, and why they're not enough for API security. We're going to start with some bits of information that actually came from a Salt Labs threat research report, where we discovered and disclosed these vulnerabilities with this particular organization, but they're very common. Both the broken object level authorization, or BOLA, and broken function level authorization, or BFLA, both appear on the OWASP API Security Top 10, the 2019 edition. Really, the most important pieces of information to zone in on here are, you'll notice that we have a cookie, right? So as the researchers here in this case, or if we were an attacker, we would first work by obtaining an authenticated session, right? And you'll see the same thing kind of down here on the BFLA example. Again, we have authenticated state, right? So none of these attacks are occurring in an unauthenticated session. The problem with these attacks is they target very specific issues within authorization, right? So in the case of BOLA, we were manipulating file and ID parameters, right? So we had an authenticated state, but we were attempting to access objects or data for which we were not authorized, right? But we're still in an authenticated session. That's very important to remember as we get to the next piece of this, where we're going to go back to that reference architecture we use quite frequently. And similarly, in the case of broken function level authorization, you could see that the user ID or uname that we were authenticated and authorized as is one user, and then within the message body or post payload, we're actually manipulating the object we want to access upon, right? In this case, we're abusing a function. In this case, it was to change parameters about a given user. And in this case, we're actually marking them as deleted. So we could delete any user within the platform. So another type of authorization flaw, but again, occurring within an authenticated session. Now, for the second piece of this, we're going to go into that reference architecture. And now remember that in that last example of attacks we dove in on, BFLA and BOLA, we had authenticated state, right? So if you think about a web application firewall or an API gateway, typically they're built using rules or signatures to identify known malicious patterns or character sets. Those can be useful for identifying certain types of injection attacks, like cross-site scripting or SQL injection or JSON injection or XML injection. There's a large spectrum of injection style attacks. So you can maybe specify some characters that might be used in those styles of injection attacks, but those authorization flaws are not something that web application firewalls are designed to detect, right? Because they don't know what a normally authenticated and authorized user session looks like. Right, you have to kind of analyze the complete API sequence to get that full context, to know that there is actually an abuse of authorization occurring there. So that's the same with web application firewalls or API gateways when they're trying to detect attacks. The other problem is that, for an API gateway or even a WAF to function, they have to be front-ending that API, right? And in the case of API gateways, it's very common that an organization would mediate, their known and formally published APIs with, outer and inner API gateways, particularly if you're in the world of microservices and you have a microservice architecture. Maybe that's, hosted within a Kubernetes environment. That's certainly common. But that's kind of you would say, the known or sanctioned API services. The problem is that you're not necessarily mediating all API calls, right? So the web server might be hosting an API that you're not mediating. App servers have APIs that you don't have visibility over. Email servers also, right? We saw Exchange server attacks very recently where you could abuse the API as the initial attack vector and then pivot to other systems within a network. but often organizations are not front-ending or mediating those API calls. So really problematic. And same with database servers, right? Everything's kind of API centric these days, or API enabled, because that's how we build systems and applications. And the problem just gets worse, right? If you think about PaaS environments, we're likely not mediating them either, right? And that's whether it's pure serverless, something like AWS Lambda. You don't even have to mediate those calls, right? The code can just execute and terminate. And similarly, PaaS environments such as like Salesforce or Pega, you might not be mediating those environments either, and they all work on APIs, right? So a lot of API calls are just not being mediated to begin with, so organizations just don't have that visibility to even detect these styles of authorization attacks, let alone the fact that even if you could insert yourself there, you're just not going to be effective at detecting those styles of authorization attacks because they aren't well defined, or they don't follow well defined patterns, such as exploits and injection attacks.